In this video, we're going to create the wall with the door inside. I'll start with the polygon plane in my front view. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Plane, and I'll drag the shape I need. I'm going to go to my perspective view to introduce these curves so it's a little clearer what's going on. So in order to establish this, we need to define the door surface. First, I'll be going to Mesh Tools and Insert Edge Loop. I'm going to need two vertical ones. I'll just drop them in and move them afterwards. And then one horizontal. Now I'll return to my front view and I'll put the ghosting on by clicking on these two white boxes. And now if I select the curve I want to move and double click on it, I can drag the whole curve even though it's been cut now, but the two verticals. I'll double click on each vertical and move them if necessary. So if I was to go to my perspective view, I have something like this. Now the first thing I'd like to do is I'm going to establish a lower poly count for the wall itself. And I'll be using the multi-cut tool. So I'll go to Mesh Tools once again and multi-cut. And I'm going to put these diagonals from the corners of the door shape to the corner of the wall. And each time I introduce a curve, if I hit return, I can use the tool again. Now I'm going to hit W on the keyboard so that now I don't introduce curves where I don't want them. Now we want to get rid of these two verticals and then the two horizontals, and that will reduce our poly count by one poly, which is minimal, but it adds up. Right clicking, I'll choose Edge at 6 o'clock and I'll shift select the ones I want to get rid of. And then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh and I'm going to choose Delete Edge and Vertex. Now the reason I'm using this tool, which if I wanted to I could use the key quit, which would be Command Delete or Control Delete, I want to make sure I get rid of the vertices. If I were to just click on one of these and hit the delete key by itself, it would leave the vertex there, which would make this thing kind of messy later on if we had to do any in-depth modeling on it. Now I'm going to separate out the door shape from the wall. Right-clicking, again, I'll choose Face, I'll select Face, and then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and then you'll see way down at the bottom the term Extract, and that will separate it out. Now I'll right-click and go back to my object mode, and if I select what is now the door surface, you can see it's by itself. Now, so it's easier to see what's going on in the video tutorial. In my viewport, I'm going to click on the little box grid shape here with the blue box inside, and I'll click on that. And that will give me the reference lines of all my edges without it being selected. Now that I have the door shape selected, I'm going to just pull that out for a moment. And we're going to establish the door molding. And we'll do that by using our extrude tool. So I'm going to right click and then I'll choose Edge and I'll shift select these new inside edges. If I were to go to Edit Mesh and then use my extrude tool, I can now extrude edges the way I'd like them to be. Now I'm going to want to center this tool before I start to play with the function. So I'll click on the little blue dial that we see here. Let me turn off the template so we can see this. I'll select that, and now that means I can click, and if I activate my scale function for the extrude tool and pull on the middle cube to the left, it's going to give me pretty much what I want. And now that I have what I want, I'll return to my object mode. I'm going to move the door surface out of the way for the moment. And if I look at the bottom of that surface where the wall is now, and again I'll click on the cube with the blue box in the middle of it, I have these edges that these two edges have to come down. So I'll right click and I'll choose Vertex and I'll shift select those two inside vertexes and I'll just pull that down. I'll hit F on the keyboard so I can zoom in and be a little bit more precise. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to right click and go back to my object mode. Now I'd like the molding to have a little bit of dimension. So I'm going to be selecting the faces we just created. Right clicking, I'll choose face, and I'll shift select those new 3 faces, and then going to Edit Mesh Extrude. Once again, I'll center it by clicking on that blue dial, and I'll just pull out on that to give it some thickness. So now I've got the molding against the wall. I'll right click and choose Object Mode, and I'll save. Next, we need to scale the door surface to fit the new molding. So I'll right click and I'll choose Edge, and I'll just go in and move these edges so they logically would fit inside that molding once the door is done. Returning to my object mode, I'm going to my perspective view. I'm putting the wall on a layer so that I can see the template for doing the door itself, and it'll be a little clearer in the video tutorial. I'll select the poly for the door, and we need to establish the same sort of way of working that we did for the wall with the windows. I'm going to start by putting a horizontal edge at the top to establish those 3 windows. Getting my Insert Edge Loop tool, I'll put an edge in, and I'll go to my front view to make sure it's in the position I want. Hitting W to return to my Move tool, I'll place it there. And now I need to go in and I need to put in 4 new edges once I have separated out that new polygon at the top. I'll right click, choose face, select the face, edit mesh, and extract. I'll right click and go back to my object mode, and then I'll get my Insert Edge Loop tool under Mesh Tools, and I'll just drop 4 edges in here, and then I'll reposition them afterwards. Hitting W, I'll go to my front view, and I'll go to each edge and line it up with the template. So if we look at it in a perspective view, we're looking at something like this. I'll right click and go back to my object mode. Next, we're going to use the extrude tool to make the windows just the way we did on the wall. I'll right click and choose face, selecting the 3 middle faces, holding the shift, edit mesh, extrude, and because I want them to be individual windows, I need to go to where it says keep faces together and click on the word on. It'll make it off, which means now if I establish my scale tool by clicking on one of the cubes and grab the one in the middle and pull to the left, you can see now it's giving me 3 separate identical windows. I'll pull forward a little bit on the z-axis, the blue arrow. And then I'll either go to Edit Mesh Extrude again, or I'll hit G, which is the key quick for the tool, and I'll pull that back. Next, I'm going to add some thickness to the door. I'll shift select both of the polys. Going to Mesh, I'll choose Combine. And now I'll right click and choose Edge. And I'm going to select the edges around the perimeter. And then I'll go to Edit Mesh and Extrude. I'll center the Extrude tool by clicking on the blue dial. And then I'll just drag on the z-axis to give it the thickness I want.